Hey, I'm Tim.
And I'm Matt at Mr. Maple, and thanks for clicking on another Mr. Maple Show episode.
We greatly appreciate you watching this video. Please like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and sign up for our weekly emails on MrMaple.com. We had 10 new exciting trees every single Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, sometimes 20. It's definitely an email you'll want to check out.
So today's topic is one of our most commonly asked questions. When can I plant a Japanese maple? And there's a lot of great answers to that. We're going to get into the weeds a little bit, discuss with you the best times you can plant your Japanese maple. We hope you enjoy it.
So Matt, when is the best time to plant a Japanese maple?
You know, there's a proverb that goes along with this, and some people say it's a Chinese proverb, some people say it's a Japanese proverb. It's probably an American nurseryman proverb, but you know, the question's often asked, when's the best time to plant a Japanese maple? And the answer people give with that proverb is either today or 20 years ago. Because the quicker you get your Japanese maple out, likely the better you're going to enjoy it and the more it's going to be there for you in the landscape.
Yeah, and there's an easy answer
Yeah.
to this, and we'll get into more depth later on in this video. But really, the most simple answer is anytime the ground's not frozen, they can actually dig it.
Yeah.
And it's better to plant it today than wait till another time.
Yeah, and we get into that a little bit in our how to winterize my Japanese maples. But often your Japanese maples are going to do better even in colder zones if those roots are in the ground, or even if the pot's planted in the ground to protect those roots. So oftentimes we're storing them inside when we don't need to. We're over cautious there. Now, in general, the easiest times to plant a Japanese maple are in spring and fall, but there's a lot of great times to plant a Japanese maple.
Yeah, anytime that plant can actually be dug and planted in, it makes it really simple to plant it, but they require different care once you've planted them. Like planting during the summer is when we often plant here at the nursery, and it requires more water, but they get established so much faster because of that heat that comes in from the summer.
Inevitably, when we get to plant our stock plants, as always, in June, July, and August, that's when we have time to do some gardening. Maybe not anymore as we've gotten busier and busier, but that's inevitably when we're trying to lay out our gardens out. We've got a little past our spring push, and we're like, hey, let's get some of our stocks in the ground. And we're out there in August trying to dig holes. Now, generally, you would say to avoid peak heats in your higher heat areas. So if you're in an extreme heat climate, you know, if you're in Dallas, you may want to avoid the peak heats of the year, where actually your winter may even be easier for you to plant.
And if you're in a zone 5, you may want to avoid the winter months because your ground's going to be frozen. And those late fall times, it may be better for you to plant in the early spring, as those plants are leafing out so it can get established before those cold winter months.
Yeah, it's often been said that in your zone 5 and some of your colder climates, that your spring is your easiest time to plant. Now, what you want to be conscious of there, protecting your plants until after your threat of frost. You know, in those zones, you want to protect the new foliage if they're leafed out early or anything like that for those later frosts. But by planting it as early as you can that season, you're going to get those roots set in. You're going to be better prepared for colder climates and more extreme changes that following winter if you're planting in the spring in your colder climates. Now, in your hotter climates, that may be a little bit different.
Now, Japanese maples, when you plant them, can take up to 2 years to get established fully and really start getting their full amount of growth. People often say the first year they creep, the second year they leap. And Japanese maples, it's really the quickest time you can get that tree in the ground so it can start getting established, and remembering that you need to continue to give it care, extra care if you're planting in the hot part of the summer. You're going to definitely need to give that extra care. If you're planting in the spring, you're going to have to watch out for frost.
Yeah.
If you're planting in the fall, you need to make sure that you're not in a super, super cold zone where it's you're planting it too late in the season.
Now, some of the easiest times to plant for some of the hotter zones may be in the fall because the tree's already about to drop leaf, you're already starting to go dormant. But that's not to say if you have a tree in the summer and don't get it planted, because oftentimes what people will assume is that they need to baby trees in containers. And you're doing more harm more often with this process of drying them out and trying to water them in pots and all this than you are just getting them in the ground and letting them do their thing. I mean, they're more naturally protected with some soil around those roots.
And I always say, if you're going to have to take care of it in a pot, why don't you put it in the ground and take care of it and let it get established? I mean, that's really I think what I believe most about planting a tree is if you're going to plant it already, if you're going to plant it, why don't you just go ahead and plant it and take care of it in the ground? Because if you take care of it in the ground, it's going to grow so much faster. It's going to have more room to get established, and it'll get established so it can get to those leaping stages later.
We're here in Zone 6B in Western North Carolina. Tomorrow's February 1st when we're shooting this video, and we plant quite a bit this time of the year. When the ground's not frozen, it's an easy time for us to get out and see the location and kind of lay things out. So this is the time when we do plant as well here in our gardens.
And everybody will have their own unique time that they want to do this. And so it may be good to talk to other gardening friends and figure out what they do in their specific areas.
Yeah.
Because people, like, we can plant during the summer here and just continue to make sure they get watered, and the plants do fantastic.
Yeah.
It's really one of the quickest times they get established for
So
us.
I think one of the most honest answers is it depends on how much you want to pay attention to the plant.
Yep.
Because you can plant in every single season in most zones if you're going to be conscious of your water amount, if you're going to be conscious of your shade, if you're going to be conscious of your frost, and you're going to be conscious of how active your tree is versus how quick your winter's coming on. So if you're conscious of those items and you really let those factors play in, you really can plant a Japanese maple in most places when the ground isn't frozen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really the essence of it. And there's no real wrong answer. I mean, it's impossible to dig it and put it in the ground when it's frozen.
Right.
I mean, that's one
You're
of the
not
reasons
going
we
into
say,
a tundra with it.
yeah, you're not going to be able to dig into just hard as a rock soil and plant a Japanese maple. But when it's not frozen, you can find a way to grow the Japanese maple and plant it. And there's no real wrong time to plant it.
Yeah.
And it's really, for us, I always argue that it's better to plant it right away so it can start getting established.
They're certainly going to be easier to grow in the ground than they are in containers for most people. And that's true even in hotter zones or colder zones. You're typically going to make more mistakes as gardeners trying to wait for fall. If, say, you've got that tree and it's
They're
May.
way more forgiving.
Yeah, they're way more forgiving. So it's going to be the easiest process for you to even plant the pot and then wait and then relocate during your perfect season, or just to go ahead and get it into the ground completely at that point.
So when you're planting a Japanese maple, we go through so many different processes: keys, good drainage, young plants tips. You can always put a stake or something so people see the plant. They don't trip over a young plant as it's starting to get established.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of videos. We'll go specifically onto a video later on the best ways to plant a Japanese maple.
Yeah.
But the key thing, like Matt talked about, if you're going to pay attention to it in the spring, the summer, or the fall, or the winter when it's not actually, ground's not frozen, you can plant year round.
I think one of the easiest tips for planting, like we're here in zone 6B here in western North Carolina. I think right now is actually an easy time to plant because you get your tree acclimated for leaf out in the spring. You've it's a simple time to go for. You know, there's just factors to be conscious of in every single season. So if you're planting now, I would say one of the main factors to be conscious of is getting your tree acclimated so that you're protecting it from a spring frost. But now is an awesome time. If you get some time here, especially in the south, we get a lot of days where the ground isn't completely frozen. You can get out and do a little bit of gardening. You still have some time. So now is actually a really easy time to get acclimated. So that's a great time to get everything set up for the spring. Be conscious during this time of your spring frost time. So that's one thing to look for. In the spring is an easy time to plant because they're at their most vigorous stage. So during that stage, you'll have to be a little bit more conscious of the water for the tree. So during the spring, you're going to be thinking about the water amounts. The maples are at their most vigorous part of the season. So you certainly can plant during the spring, but those are things to be conscious about as well.
Yeah, the Japanese maples go through 2 flushes of growth. And that typically means that you're going to get 2 major surges of growth on the top, but also 2 surges of growth at the bottom as well.
Yeah.
And when you plant during the spring, you're planting before that spring flush, and those roots will shoot out so the plant can take care of itself more and more. When you do it before the summer flush of growth, is also the other time that you could plant during the summer, because that second flush of growth, it's also going to shoot out as long as you're watering it.
Yeah.
And during the fall is an excellent time to plant because it can start to get established more and more before those hot parts of the summer in those hotter zones.
Fall isn't the only time to plant. Really, you can plant anytime, but fall may be the easiest just because everything's going to drop leaf anyway soon. So if you do drop leaf, it's very forgiving. There's just things to be conscious of during every single season. And so knowing your environment, knowing what you're going with your Japanese maple, look at our video on fertilizing Japanese maples because that's a major factor too in keeping your tree too active.
And if you have in your zone, post your zone in the comments and give some tips to other people on planting for your zones, what you think is best and how you've done it best. There's no real wrong answer, but there may be different ways that people prefer to do it in their different gardening zones.
And it's certainly going to vary for customers in Atlanta versus customers in Chicago. And we have customers in both. You know, there's going to be times when you want to be more prepared and getting the tree more established before those colder Chicago winters versus somebody in Atlanta who, you know, you're probably going to be able to plant year-round in Atlanta really easily.
And we have people in Chicago planting almost year-round when the ground's not frozen. So anytime they find a time, they're out there planting their trees. And so it's kind of unusual and different for every single person and what they prefer, but also there's different ways you need to take care of those plants. So if you have any tips for people in your gardening zone, put your gardening zone where you're at, maybe your city, and also put those tips, because I think people are going to find that very useful.
Yeah, it's a conversation we like to open up with y'all, and it's something that is a little bit different in each area, but it's something that there's no one perfect answer. I think the most conscious thing, like Tim said at the front, to avoid is the ground when it's in its heavy freeze, because your roots are going to get, you know, more established, and you're going to have your soil more conditioned, and everything's going to be more right when the ground's not in a heavy freeze. But other than avoiding that, most areas can plant Japanese maples year round.
We greatly appreciate you watching this video. Please like this video, post in the comments. I think that could be really useful for a lot of people.
Yeah,
And
your zone, where you're located, and then some of your tips for when you like to plant.
And we greatly appreciate you watching this video. Always sign up for our weekly emails on Mr. Maple. And if you want to support our channel, remember to shop on MrMaple.com.
God bless.
And have a great day.
All you have to do to get involved in the giveaway is like, subscribe, and share our video. Then under every single video you want, you can go and comment, "I dig Mr. Maple." And every single time you comment, you'll be entered to win a Mr. Maple hat. So we're going to be doing a giveaway for one of these hats. We're coming up on 8,000 subscribers. Get involved.